Mhm.
Hey y'all, so this is the first Team LoCoFit roundtable, and we're pretty excited to do this. Myself and all the coaches, we've been having weekly meetings, and we thought these would be really good conversations to record, almost just like our banter and our discussions around things. So we wanted to every week sit down. Hopefully it's going to be all of us. We're going to try and make it all five, but sometimes it'll be maybe four or even three, depending on our schedules. But it is myself, owner and head coach of Team LoCoFit. In the upper, never mind, I was going to do the quadrants. I'm like, I'm going to mess that up. So it is Karina is in the top. She is assistant coach. Lauren DeRico. I've coached you for how many years? And I've said your name wrong.
God.
Dude, it's so bad. So anyway, Lauren, or Blonde, other assistant coach, Jillian, assistant coach as well. And then at the bottom is Ryan. He is our training director at Team LoCoFit. So we're super excited to have everybody here and to talk. And I'm going to stop doing this introduction because I don't know how to do intros. So our first topic today is going to be maintaining muscle while in a deficit. And this is a question that a lot of our clients ask, or just even in general on social media that we get. And I would say that there's probably two ways to best maintain muscle mass. And that would be to have a high protein diet and to continue to resistance train hard during your deficit.
Yeah, so I think that as we get further into a deficit, the training is often kind of like the first to slip. And you start to see yourself getting lean, and you kind of maybe think that it doesn't need to be as intense. You're cutting hard, your nutrition's on point. But in reality, in order to continue to hold on to that lean mass while we're cutting calories so low and doing so much activity, it is imperative that the intensity is there. So I know Ryan will sometimes add RPE suggestions, as well as us when we have training clients, we'll add RPE suggestions, just so people have a literal target for how they should feel during their training so that they can't just back off when it gets a little rough. So yeah, that's definitely something that I have experienced personally. I'm sure everybody else that has prepped here has experienced that as well. And it can be very easy to convince yourself that it's okay to go a little lighter. It's okay to skip that set. It's not okay.
Yeah, especially when you get in prep and, your calories are low and your energy is low, you're going to be very tempted to just take it easy. But training intensity makes a huge difference when it's high, where it should be. And also, I think a good point to make also is, with dieting, just taking it slow too, and not just rapidly decreasing calories and just dropping weight at a rapid rate.
Yeah, super good point.
Yeah.
Jill, dieting slowly. I mean, you're still going to have to I think this is where people get this confused, is like they think that means not aggressive. You still might have to get aggressive, most likely, but you can do so in a calculated and well thought out manner and just kind of take it down stepwise. And that way you're going to maintain your strength better. And maintaining strength is not the only way that we can see if you've maintained muscle, but it is a good indicator if you've dropped your lifts, exponentially, they will drop. And this is what we see with most clients, is that the lifts will drop. And that's just due to lower body fat, lower body weight, and just leverage is changing a lot too.
Yeah, it's not crazy drops though, from what I've seen. The drops aren't as crazy, and if you have a baseline of off-season numbers or you've dieted before, you can always compare and contrast the dieted numbers versus off-season. So you're not comparing apples to oranges, but a lot of the clients, I wouldn't say, they don't see exponential drops like you were saying. So that's definitely something to monitor.
Yeah, and that comes down to training.
I think another thing to keep in mind too, going back to what Lauren said about RPE, is that it's also important to almost not expect for RPE to stay the same when you are getting leaner. Don't necessarily push it when you are so lean and risk injury. RPE is going to change for a certain set of weight as you get leaner. So it's don't also training hard is very important in maintaining muscle in a deficit, but don't get discouraged if you are not as strong, and don't if something feels like an RPE 8, 9, 6 weeks later than before, where it felt like a 5, 6, don't get completely discouraged. There are a lot of other factors that play into why that happens. Stress, obviously, the deficit itself as well.
Yeah, there's so many factors obviously with the training, and that could also mean that you need a deload too. So,
Yeah,
there's that as well. If you're just like tanking and everything else feels pretty good, but you're like, I just can't lift this week. Well, you might need a deload. And some people don't want to deload during a diet. And I guess we could talk about that another time, but I do think that that's super important as well. Yeah. Like Karina.
Yeah. I hate deloading.
I'm like, take a deload week. She's like, no. I'm like, you need to take a deload week. And then, wow, things happen.
Yeah.
I want to just briefly touch on ways to kind of like also control environmental factors that can help make your training a little better. So making sure that we are in control of our sleep, so that we are getting regular sleep. That way we're well recovered for the next training session, as well as, and this gets a little dicey as calories start to dwindle a little bit, especially for a majority of people that ends up being carbs, but being smart about when you're consuming your carbs around training, to ensure that if you are eating before your lift, which at that point you probably will need something, that you're kind of targeting the carbohydrate maybe around your lift. That way we're getting good fuel before, good recovery after. So the more that we can control and kind of keep in sync and consistent to help the training, the better.
Yeah, and I think also just to keep in mind, like when you start dieting, a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to diet because I don't want to lose my strength, but that's not necessarily, doesn't have to be the case. There are a lot of things that you can control and manipulate to ensure that you keep your strength, at least for a majority of that dieting phase. It doesn't have to just plummet at the very start of your diet,
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, not just cutting super aggressively to start. Like if you're maintaining your weight on 2,200 calories, there's no reason to go to 1,200 and an hour of cardio every day for the first week of your prep or your diet. Like that's just, you're definitely going to not be super strong, and you're definitely going to have some shitty workouts from that. So instead of, kind of stepwise bringing it down like we normally would suggest. And again, the protein thing, I mean, there's pretty much the protein research that's coming out now, and again, not research isn't everything, we understand that, but there is a lot of really cool research coming out with higher protein diets having no negative effects and only really positive effects, which is basically just gaining more muscle mass, even when there's significantly more calories coming from protein. So now Dr. Campbell and Jose Antonio have done research in this area, all in resistance trained population, and I can vouch for Dr. Campbell's lab to say that every single person in that study, and Jill can too, is being resistance trained by basically a lab assistant. So you're having very tightly, like Jillian, very tightly regulated training. So it's not just like, oh, we gave them a training program. Like we know exactly what they're doing, how they're performing it. And then also they're training in diet logs. So it is very, very intensive and controlled at Dr. Campbell's lab.
Yeah, I have the opportunity to work in the lab and supervise some of the subjects when they're training. And then this past semester, I was able to actually be a nutrition coach for some of them. So I could definitely vouch for all of that as well. So
very, very tightly controlled.
We should hire you.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. So going to the next question, which I guess we're going to change the semantics as we kind of talk about this, is just managing client expectations in general. And this is something that's super important as a coach, is to manage expectations, or rather manage goals. And I want Ryan to expand on this because he did talk about it a little bit earlier in the meeting. But this is something, no matter, if somebody reaches out to us or even current clients, like we're always very honest with them. And that's kind of where my take on the managing expectations is. If somebody says, oh, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds tomorrow, it's not happening, right? Or, oh, I want to step on stage in 8 weeks, it's not happening. Or, oh, I want to go and, double my deadlift PR. Probably not going to happen in a few weeks, right? So it is about managing expectations in the short term and the long term goals. But what did you want to add about that, Rye, with kind of the wording?
So recently I was at a seminar called Be Activated with a physiotherapist from South Africa named Douglas Eel. I would say at least half the seminar we spent just as much time talking about philosophy as we did talking about the actual nuts and bolts of of his Be Activated material. And one of the biggest things he harped on with us was, as a general group, and as, I don't want to say as Americans, but because he's such a well-traveled person, he's worked with a lot of different cultures, our language and the way that we speak, in a way, is assuming that people are speaking the same language and having the same background and understanding as us. So using the language appropriately to the best of our ability. And the word expectations he wasn't a fan of, because using it with clients, hands-on clients that he works with. So if you have expectations and they're not met, then you're disappointed, they're disappointed. Everyone kind of has a different view of what you just went through. So like the work that he did is now no longer as appreciated, and their emotions are lower now than they were because they had some expectations that were set and they weren't met. So now they didn't reach those expectations. So now you're feeling disheartened. So what we kind of want to change it to now is thinking or using the word more of goals, whether it's short-term or long-term. And I know in my client profile, we use short-term goals, long-term goals, and expectations. So I'm going to try and reword that and just use goals, because if we miss a goal, then it's not necessarily a failure. It's just a redirection of the target. So you aim for something different and then readjust. So psychologically, I think it's a little bit different, but changing our language to where it changing our language so that we can better define what we're trying to explain to the clients, and so that they can have a better grasp and understanding of what we're trying to give to them. So it's a reciprocal back and forth. You send a message, they're a receiver, and they send a message back. So
yeah, I think that makes sense too, because there are, like, when I think of, you know, I've always been saying that, oh, we got to manage the client's expectations. And it's more about like when we talk about like the business side of things, right? Like, hey, we have expectations. Like, I have expectations of you guys. You have expectations of me. That's a little bit more clean cut. When we're talking about a goal, or let's say a client expectation, it is way less clear cut, right? Like, yes, everybody has specific goals they want to reach, but how we do it, the time frame, all that can change. So I can definitely see where he's coming from when he says like that, you know, put somebody in a negative mental state if they don't necessarily hit the expectation. And we all deal with clients who are, let's just say, more perfect on the end of the perfectionism scale. I think a lot of us kind of fall into that category as well. So I think that it's very easy to fall into that, like, oh, I didn't hit exactly what I was expected to do. And so that means I'm a failure. And that can either lead to overcompensation or undercompensation in certain behaviors with clients. And then lastly, do you guys, I saw a hand. Was that a thinking hand, Jill?
Something's turning in here. So yeah, I think just to, you know, kind of piggyback off of that, I think, you know, rewording that is a good idea. And also it just comes down to the client's perspective on that all as well. And I think also something else that this made me think of was, again, you said something with how things change and how goals are always kind of evolving. And this can really apply to like both competitors and just lifestyle clients, just because competitors go through different seasons all the time. So just keeping the short-term goals and long-term goals in their mind throughout those different phases, I think are really important for clients to consider, and just communicate with coaches about as well.
Yeah, because on the client end, it's really easy, especially the long-term goals, to like lose sight of that. So that's something that's really nice. And, you know, we ask those kinds of things, but, you know, a client listening or somebody who, you know, has a coach or wants to be coached, it is really important to be able to relay that information to your coach if you are necessarily struggling with it. And it's also important as the coach to keep that in their mind, you know, because a lot, like, the short-term goals are fairly easy to stick to. It's a lot harder to say, hey, okay, we're going to do this in 9 months. People are like, what?
Yeah.
And for some clients, it's very easy, but for other people, that's kind of why you have to create the short-term goals so we can stick to the long-term. But that was always have to be like priority.
Yeah, and touching on that, like, just kind of also harping on the importance of communication between the client and coach to making sure that those expectations or goals are always clear. It's really hard for a coach to direct a client in the direction they want to if they're not very clear with their goals.
Yeah.
And their clients are kind of like, for example, I have had a few clients who like diet and then decide they want to reverse and then become uncomfortable with the reverse and then want to diet. And it's just like, at this point, we need to keep in mind the long-term goal and why reverse dieting is, or at least increasing calories, is important for our long-term goal of being successful on stage 2-3 years from now. But there's also research that shows that when the expectations of the diet or goals are more realistic, the adherence rate is a lot higher to something that is very realistic to achieve, rather than just kind of like making a false premise of like, yes, we can get you this in this week, or we can get you this far in this amount of time, let's just see if you do the work. Like, no, we have to be honest. And sometimes it's not always going to be exactly what they want to hear. However, I want to make sure that like clients feel like they can, you know, reach that bar, or like place a bar in a reachable distance and succeed. Because once you have that momentum of success, it just keeps building upon itself.
I also think a lot of times it comes down to like at what cost kind of thing. So like we might have clients that come to us thinking that they want to do this specific goal is kind of what they have in mind. And then once we start getting into it, it's like, oh, I have to sacrifice this. And it's like, yes, if that is the goal that you want to attain, we can certainly do that. But yes, this is the risk reward ratio here. And you have to decide like, at what cost is it worth me getting on stage? You know, do I want to right now where I'm at in my life sacrifice this, and this, you know what I mean? And kind of just being realistic about it. And also having enough trust in the coach-client relationship that they don't feel bad, guilty, like they're disappointing you. Because I know a lot of times with the type A client, if they're not perfect, or if they kind of feel like they maybe want to back off on the goal they had originally said they wanted to do, it becomes almost like an anxiety thing of how do I communicate this to the coach? How do I tell the coach? Am I going to disappoint my coach? And it's like, no, this is why we're here, and we can certainly help you go in a different direction, but we're never going to match up properly if you're not communicating open and honest. And that goes for even little slip ups. If it's just like you were over on your macros one day, but you didn't tell us, that can kind of like snowball into bigger things. And we don't ever want that to be the case. And it's our job as a coach to be able to help everybody at every single point and meet them where they're at. And that might mean having a hard conversation about like, yeah, maybe this is something we can look at a year from now, but maybe right now it's not realistic.
Exactly. So managing short and long-term goals has to be the number one priority for both the coach and the client. And starting with that upfront conversation. Like when people sign up, we lay that all out for people for that reason. Because I found that if I was never super upfront, and the plan can change, but if you don't say it up front, generally people are like, wait, that's not what I thought we talked about. So always having as many details up front as possible. But like, hey, here's a projected short and long-term timelines. And this is what I'm thinking that would be best. And then so for the last part, the self-created meal plans, or even just meals, not even a whole meal plan. But we run into a lot of clients, whether it's prep or lifestyle, who are busy. They're traveling. They have a lot going on with work, family, whatever it might be. Most people are busy. So what I find, the great thing about macros is that you do have flexibility. The not great thing about tracking your macros is that you have a lot of flexibility. So it can lead to these feelings of, oh, I'm very overwhelmed. I don't know what to eat. I have to prep so much food. And I've had clients say, oh, I try to eat something new every day. And I'm like, I could not even imagine that. Like even in an off season when I have plenty of calories, like there's just so much that, you know, that's so much time and planning. Mm-hmm. So what I find so helpful, and we've had a lot of clients kind of transition to this, is almost creating this like self-made meal plan, or even just, hey, 2 meals a day, like let's plan this out for the week. And then you already have that set in, structured, and you're more likely to hit that way.
And I would like to say with that, especially bikini girls, stop eating weird shit. Keep it simple. Just keep it simple. Whole foods. It will, I promise you, it will make you feel fuller for longer. You won't have to think about like what this weird item goes with over here and what those ingredients are going to do to your body. Like we don't know. Keep it simple. And yeah, I think that at least starting with 2 a day is a great place, because if you're eating 3 square meals per se, that's great. 2 are already knocked out. You don't even have to think about it. So maybe if you have a little flexibility, either in the morning or the evening, to kind of come home and decide what you want and maybe fill out the rest of your macros, cool. But to have 2 that are solid, consistent, don't have to think twice, I think that's a great place to start, and it's not overwhelming.
Yeah,
you know?
Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I typically start with that idea with my clients who want to do the more structured approach with the macro meal plan. So having those 2 meals already planned out and tracked, you literally like have no excuse not to kind of be within your targets for the day, and you don't have to think about it while you're, you know, at work running around all day either. And having, whether you choose to have those 2 meals planned out or your entire day, it'll ensure that you're within your targets, and then it's just easy to kind of go throughout your day and just grab a meal and go.
Well, it's also easy to pinpoint too if there's an issue.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when people have issues with food, they're like, I don't know, it's just random. Well, maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Like if we eat at least consistently, then we can say, wow, every time I ate X this week, I felt a certain way, right? And then we can either remove it or we can change, when you're eating it, whatever it might be. And I know this is probably super important for you, Karina, right now with, being so deep into a diet. You don't really want to have these fluctuations from the mental perspective, but also even from the calorie perspective, because there are differences. Like, if you're always making different stuff, there's a higher chance that you're going to potentially like miscalculate something. So if you're eating at least the same thing all week, it's a little bit easier to be more consistent.
Yeah, and I always tell clients that like our bodies thrive on consistency, and that can even go for like the foods you're eating day in and day out. So if you keep that consistent for like a couple weeks at a time, you're probably going to react really well and kind of notice trends when you decide to switch it up another week. And just that, and keeping your sleep in line and your water intake all together, like that will just kind of keep things regular for you.
Yeah, and from a client or a competitor's perspective, I find that if I like down to my foods consistent, I get into this groove in a fat loss phase where I'm like consistently like losing. And then if I decide to, if I have to, I will switch it up. Like I'm not going to, remove heaven and earth to like make sure I have the same like meal that I have every day. But when you have a very specific goal and your diet becomes very limited, it's best to like keep that consistency. However, I do believe that there is a spectrum of structure and chaos. From a coaching perspective, if I get someone who has never tracked macros before, and has only like had, only understands food groups, I will make the suggestion of like, hey, I'm not going to say hit these numbers with whatever you want. No, like I always try to recommend like an 80-20 rule of 80% like whole, nutritious, micronutrient dense foods, and 20% of the time for like when you really need that like mental treat or whatever for yourself. And then there are some people who like can't handle having foods planned, like 6, 5, 4 meals all planned out. Like they feel like anxious about not being able to go out of that structure. So as you guys mentioned, having at least 2 meals, like that's like the perfect like happy medium in between of having that structure and then giving yourself a little room for chaos if you get stuck at work or you're like you can't get home in time for another meal. But yeah, keeping that spectrum in mind for each and every client and knowing that not everyone has the same background or hasn't been trekking for forever or has only followed a meal plan their whole life is very important when creating a plan for a client as well.
I think that too, like with what you just said, Karina, that I don't know, I just got a weird notification from Zoom.
Yeah, me too.
That the client also, I mean, this might just take some trial and error, and obviously the longer that you work with the coach, the better. I mean, now that I've worked with Lauren for 3 years, like we both know what works best for me. But for somebody that's brand new, like it's going to take a little bit of time. But I also think that it's so important because whether people want to admit it or not, this is like the unsexy part of competing. You're going to have some stress around food. You're going to have some anxiety around food. Ryan, you don't get to talk right now. Everybody else understands what I'm saying. And that is the last thing that I want to, I think a bit of it is inevitable because there are physiological things that are going on. Your body is having slight starvation response, especially deep in the diet. So yeah, you're going to be
so food focused right now
about food. So we want to try to eliminate that as much as possible. That's why I think keeping it simple is great. I think that if you can have, and again, changes for everybody. Like I'll eat the same thing every day. I don't give a shit. But some people don't like to do that, and that's fine. But so maybe the 2 is best, 2 meals is best. But trying to alleviate that stress, anxiety, food focus, I think is just absolutely one of the top priorities, especially as you get further into prep. So finding what works best for you to help kind of attenuate those responses is a large priority.
Yeah, well, like Lauren mentioned, like we talked about this the other day, like no matter what, like getting into a deep contest prep, you're going to be food focused, like no matter how flexible you try to be. But definitely doing what you can to alleviate like the severity of that food focus. That definitely is a good strategy.
You know, because if you're food focused like 2 weeks into your diet, like good luck. But and obviously there is attention to detail. There's a fine line between discipline and disorder, and I think like everybody agrees with that. And so again, you're gonna have discipline. There's gonna be a bit of restriction. We know this, but we want to try to prolong that onset for as long as possible, and then have mechanisms in place to help when we are feeling those ways. And I think that can be another topic for another day of how to do that. But yeah.
And for anybody listening who is trying to gain weight, maybe there's like 1.5 people. This is actually important too. I'm not kidding. Like Rye, like you plan a lot of your food just because if you're trying to get in quality calories, it's not going to happen by accident, right? Like, yeah, you could eat pizza all day, but thank God you don't do that.
We know what he does.
I would, but
I mean,
so.
Yeah, you would, but it's not necessarily the best. So like, what are some things that like, I mean, I know your staples. So like staples that you have.
We all know your staples.
Yes.
Olive oil.
One in particular. Eggs, lots of eggs, lots of meat, simple carbs, rice, potatoes, things like that. Those are same thing with what you guys do. I usually consistently eat almost the same breakfasts all the time. And then I usually always have a rice and a beef meal with me with whatever toppings or whatever flavor shit I want to add to it. And
like
then
3 carrots.
Yeah. Besides that, like when I'm at the fire station, I'll eat lunch and dinner with them and then have my other meals organized. But small snacks and things like trail mix, like different nuts, walnuts, almonds, dark chocolate, like 85 to 90%. I've been on the olive oil kick, which blonde Lauren and dark-haired Lauren think is hilarious. So I'll take a couple tablespoons of olive oil every day. And peanut butter and jellies, things like that. Things that are just like very easy.
Uncrustables.
So it's the complete opposite of what Karina's doing, but things that are highly palatable and that you
Karina's like eating her nails right now.
I'm like slowly withering away into this head.
So if you do that for like 6 or 7 years, you can get as big as me.
But in general, you asked me, so you didn't even answer it how I wanted you to. So basically, we bulk cook ground beef. So we always have that.
I said that.
Well, you didn't say how you did it. So bulk cook.
You too.
Yeah.
Red meat. So you always have it. And then
the rice cooker
on. We buy all the like the nut stuff separately, make that so it's just like in a baggie. So stuff like that. If you are trying to eat quality food but consistently, you're gonna have to still plan it. It doesn't just mean that you can haphazardly eat whatever. And even if you're not on Ryan's calories, which we all wish we could be, even if you are a normal sized female in the off season, you will have more calories. So it is really, really tempting to just eat whatever as it comes up. But
or not eat. Some girls just decide that they're not going to eat anything.
Well, yeah, that's not good either.
That's not you, but
I don't understand that either.
Can't relate.
Even in the off season, if your calories are a little higher, especially with that, because we do a pretty good job of making sure that we're still in a good balance. So say we put somebody at a little higher carb, that does not mean high fat also. So with that, you're going to have to kind of be strategic about what you're eating so that you're not left over with a ton of one thing and nothing of the other. So yeah, it might sound all good in theory and you can kind of freeball it, but like be careful about doing that. And that's also like a trial and error learning process, I think. But the way that we set them up in the off season is for optimal growth, not just like growth. So
growth or growth?
You decide.
Yeah. And all those habits that you build in the off season are just going to transition and make it easier when you begin a dieting phase as well. So
exactly. Yeah.
All that is for a purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. If you can't handle this,
figure it out then,
you're not creating awesome new habits in a calorie deficit. You're pretty much playing off of what you've already developed. You might tweak what you're doing, but don't just think that if you've had a, subpar meal prepping or like, how your meal timing's been going, it's probably not going to get that much better. It's just going to be a lot more of a mental struggle in prep. So I think that wraps up the very first Team LoCoFit Roundtable. Let's see if I can close this out as awkwardly as I started it. I'm going to have to get like a script for that because every time I start, I am not good. But we really appreciate you guys listening to this. Let us know if you liked it, whatever your feedback is, good, bad, ugly, we want to hear it. All open for constructive criticism. This will be on both YouTube and iTunes and also Stitcher. So for the Android people, I'm just kidding. Whoever doesn't have an iPhone, but no, really, like I know that is a thing. So we will be on all of those platforms. And if you're interested in the Team LoCoFit newsletter, where twice a week we give you guys awesome emails. So Karina writes Metcon Monday, or Metcon Monday, if you want to say it that way. So Sunday night inbox, you get a free Metcon. And then on Wednesdays, we drop an educational article written by one of the 5 of us. And you can go to our website, teamlocofit.com, and hit subscribe. And you can also apply for coaching there as well.
Hell yeah.